The crystal ships came from the dark spaces between stars like a plague of living glass. They moved wrong, flowing rather than flying, their surfaces shifting and growing as they consumed everything in their path. The galactic concordance had ruled the outer rim for 3,000 years with wisdom and peace. Now, they watched their worlds die one by one. Ambassador Thelnori stood before the great viewing wall of the council station, her silver wings trembling as another star system went dark. The Seraph were the oldest race in the concordance, beings of light and air, who had never known war until the devourers came. Around her, representatives from 16 other species watched the holographic displays with the same growing horror. "The Vega colonies are gone," reported Commander Jektar, his 6 arms working frantically at the control panels. The insectoid hive mind species had lost 12 worlds already. No survivors, no debris, nothing but empty space, where 3 billion souls once lived. High Chancellor Mordoun of the Stonewalker Republic slammed his massive fist on the council table. "How do we fight something that eats planets? Our weapons pass right through them. Our shields mean nothing. They adapt to everything we throw at them." The Devourers had appeared 18 months ago at the galaxy's edge. At first, the Concordance thought they were just another hostile species that could be reasoned with or contained. They learned too late that these creatures had no interest in territory or resources. They consumed living worlds completely, turning thriving planets into dead rocks, then moved on to the next system. "They're not just killing us," whispered Dr. Yelana from her floating containment suit. The aquatic depth dwellers had been among the first to study captured devourer fragments. "They're learning from us. Every time we try a new defense, they become immune to it within days." Ambassador Thelnori turned from the viewing wall, her ethereal face grave. "The outer rim is lost. Our fleets cannot hold them back. They will reach the core worlds within 6 months. The council chamber fell silent, except for the soft hum of life support systems. 17 species, the greatest minds in the galaxy, and none of them had an answer to this threat. The Devourers consumed everything organic, and left behind only empty husks of worlds. "There is one option," said Chancellor Mordoun slowly. His stone-like features showed reluctance. "The Savior Protocol." Several council members recoiled at the suggestion. The Savior Protocol was an ancient emergency measure, created in the early days of the Concordance, when extinction-level threats were more common. It would broadcast a signal across the entire galaxy, calling for help from any species capable of stopping such a threat. "We haven't used that signal in over 2,000 years, protested Commander Jektar. "We don't even know if anyone would answer. Or what might answer." "The signal carries our ideals," said Dr. Yelana. "Honor, sacrifice, protection of innocent life. It will only attract species that share our values." Ambassador Thelnori considered this. The Seraph had helped write the Savior Protocol's code. It was designed to appeal to noble beings, creatures who would risk themselves for others without asking for payment. The signal would reach every corner of the galaxy, but only the most advanced and moral species would be able to understand and respond to it. "What about the quarantined worlds?" asked a small voice from the corner. Representative Kilneth of the Flower Children rarely spoke in council meetings. His plant-based species communicated mostly through chemical signals. "The quarantined worlds are forbidden for good reason," said Chancellor Mordoun firmly. "Those species are too primitive or too dangerous for contact. But some of them might have advanced enough by now," pressed Kilneth. "The signal would reach them too." Ambassador Thelnori accessed the quarantine database through her neural link. Hundreds of worlds were listed, most marked as either primitive or hostile. Her attention stopped on one entry, Sol 3, also called Earth by its inhabitants. The file was marked with red warnings. "Species shows excessive aggression," she read aloud. "Constant warfare, despite advanced technology. Violent tendencies toward their own kind and others. Natural predators. Recommend permanent quarantine." "See," said Commander Jektar, "even if they could help, we wouldn't want them to. Violence solves nothing." But Ambassador Thelnori kept reading. "High adaptability, extreme persistence, capable of surviving in hostile environments, Natural pack hunters. She paused. Intelligence level. Advanced. Technological development. Rapid. The decision must be made now, announced Chancellor Mordoon, as another alert flashed on the displays. The devourers had just consumed the Harmony system, killing 8 billion souls in a matter of hours. The council voted quickly. 15 species in favor, 2 abstaining. The Savior Protocol was activated for the first time in 2 millennia. The signal burst outward from the council station at faster-than-light speed, carrying a message of desperate hope. It spoke of a dying civilization, of billions of innocent lives facing extinction, of the need for heroes to rise and save the innocent. The signal painted pictures of noble sacrifice, of standing against the darkness, of being remembered forever as saviors of the galaxy. "Now we wait," said Ambassador Thelnori as the transmission completed, "and hope that somewhere among the stars, someone hears our call." The response came 3 days later from an unexpected source. Sol 3, the quarantined world called Earth, sent back a simple message that made the entire council chamber fall silent. Message received and understood. "Help is coming. Prepare for arrival." "They didn't ask about payment," whispered Dr. Yelana. "They didn't ask about the enemy's strength. They just said they're coming." Ambassador Thelnori felt a strange mixture of hope and unease. The humans' response was exactly what they'd hoped for. But something about it felt different from what they'd expected. The message had been short and direct, with none of the flowery language of noble intention they'd received from other potential allies. "Perhaps we were wrong about them," said Representative Kilneth. "Perhaps they've grown beyond their violent past." But as Ambassador Thelnori looked at the quarantine file again, she noticed something that made her silver blood run cold. The last update to Earth's file was only 6 months old. The humans weren't just still violent, they were getting better at it. The Concordance had called for saviors. Soon they would learn what Earth considered salvation to be. The human ships arrived like wolves entering a sheep pen, where the Concordance vessels were smooth and elegant, flowing with graceful curves that spoke of art and beauty. The Earth fleet looked like it had been built for one purpose only: killing. Ambassador Thelnori watched from the observation deck as the human battle group approached Council Station. Their ships were dark metal, covered in jagged edges and weapon ports. They moved in tight formations that reminded her unpleasantly of hunting packs. Each vessel bristled with guns and missile tubes that violated at least 12 interspecies treaties on weapon design. "By the light," whispered Commander Jektar beside her. "Those aren't ships, they're flying weapons." The human flagship was the worst of all. It looked like a massive predator's skull made of black metal, with weapon systems where the teeth should be. Along its hull, someone had painted words in white letters: "Pain Train." Below that, smaller text read, "All aboard for hell. Those are the beings we called to save us? Doctor?" Yelana's voice bubbled with horror from her tank. "They look more dangerous than the devourers." A communication came through from the human flagship. The face that appeared on the screen made several council members step backward. It belonged to a woman with pale skin marked by old scars. Her hair was short and black, and her eyes were the color of winter ice. When she smiled, she showed teeth that looked far too sharp. "This is Captain Sarah Kovac of the Earth Defense Force. Permission to come aboard and discuss strategy." Ambassador Thelnori tried to maintain her diplomatic composure. "Welcome to Council Station, Captain Kovac. We are grateful for your response to our call for aid." "Don't thank us yet," said the human captain. "You might not like what we brought." An hour later, Captain Kovac and her officers entered the main conference room. The sight of them up close was even more disturbing. They all bore scars and moved like predators, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. The captain wore a uniform that was more armor than clothing, and Ambassador Thelnori could see the outlines of weapons hidden beneath it. "These are my senior officers," Captain Kovac said, gesturing to the humans behind her. "Lieutenant Colonel Chen, our science officer; Major Williams, tactics; Commander Torres, special operations." Each human looked more dangerous than the last. Lieutenant Colonel Chen had the pale, hungry look of someone who enjoyed his work too much. Major Williams was missing his left arm, but seemed unconcerned about it. Commander Torres had tattoos covering her neck that looked like kill marks. Before we begin, said Ambassador Thelnori carefully, we should explain our rules of warfare. The Concordance follows strict protocols designed to minimize suffering and protect innocent life. Captain Kovac raised an eyebrow. How's that working out for you? The question hung in the air like a physical weight. Chancellor Mordoon's stone features darkened with anger. We do not sacrifice our principles for easy victories. Easy victories? Major Williams laughed, and the sound made Ambassador Thelnori's wings twitch with instinctive fear. Lady, you're losing a war against space bugs. Easy victories are exactly what you need. The devourers are not simple insects, protested Dr. Yelena. They are a highly advanced hive mind species, with adaptive capabilities beyond anything we've encountered. They're parasites, said Lieutenant Colonel Chen, his voice clinical and cold. I've read your files. They consume organic matter and reproduce by corrupting existing life forms. Classic parasitic behavior pattern. We prefer to think of them as a misguided species that might be reasoned with, said Representative Kilneth. The humans all looked at each other and started laughing. It was not a pleasant sound. Reasoned with, repeated Commander Torres. That's adorable. Have you tried asking nicely? Maybe they just need a hug. Ambassador Thelnori felt her patience wearing thin. Captain Kovac, if you cannot respect our values, perhaps this alliance was a mistake. Captain Kovac's smile disappeared instantly. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet and deadly serious. Your values are why you're losing. Your values are why 3 billion people died last week. Your values are going to get everyone in this galaxy killed, unless you let us do what we do best. And what is it that you do best? Asked Chancellor Mordoon. We kill things that need killing, said Captain Kovac simply. We're very good at it. We don't want to change your society, added Major Williams. We're not here to convert you to our way of thinking. We're here to solve your pest problem. The devourers are sentient beings, insisted Dr. Yelena. They deserve the same consideration as any other species. Lieutenant Colonel Chen leaned forward, and Ambassador Thelnori saw something cold and calculating in his eyes. Doctor, have you ever dissected one of their specimens while it was still alive? Of course not. Dr. Yelena recoiled. That would be monstrous. I have, said Chen calmly. 17 times, in fact. Would you like to know what I learned? The silence in the room was deafening. Ambassador Thelnori realized she was looking at beings who saw warfare in a completely different way than the Concordance did. These humans didn't fight to defend themselves or protect others. They fought to win, no matter what it took. Show us the war zone, said Captain Kovac. Show us where your people are dying. Then we'll show you what we do to parasites. Commander Jektar brought up a holographic display of the contested border regions. Red zones marked where the devourers were advancing. Blue zones showed Concordance defensive positions. The red was spreading faster than the blue could retreat. Our standard tactic is a fighting withdrawal, explained Commander Jektar. We evacuate civilian populations and establish defensive lines to slow their advance. How many civilians have you evacuated successfully? Asked Major Williams. Approximately 40%, admitted Commander Jektar. And the other 60%? They were consumed before we could reach them. Captain Kovac studied the display with Predator's eyes. Your problem is that you're fighting defensively against an enemy that doesn't understand mercy. You're trying to save everyone, so you save no one. We refuse to sacrifice innocent lives for military advantage, said Chancellor Mordoon firmly. And that's why you're losing, said Captain Kovac. She turned to her officers. Gentlemen, lady, I think it's time for a field trip. Let's go see these devourers up close. As the humans left the conference room, Ambassador Thelnori felt a deep unease settling in her chest. The Concordance had called for saviors, beings of light who would stand against the darkness with noble hearts and pure intentions. Instead, they had received something else entirely. Something that smiled when it talked about dissecting living creatures and laughed at the idea of mercy. Something that looked at the greatest crisis in galactic history and saw only another pest to be exterminated. Perhaps they had made a terrible mistake. But as another star system disappeared from the tactical display, Ambassador Thelnori realized they were out of other options. The humans were all they had left. She just hoped the galaxy would survive its salvation. The first joint operation was supposed to be a simple reconnaissance mission to the Kepler 442 system, where Concordance forces were attempting a strategic withdrawal from advancing devourer forces. Ambassador Thelnori had insisted on observing the mission personally, hoping to see how the humans might contribute to their defensive strategy. She wished she hadn't. The Concordance battle plan was elegant in its simplicity. They would evacuate the remaining civilian population from Kepler 442b, then lure the devourers into an asteroid field, where prepared charges would collapse several large rocks onto the enemy formation. It was a clean, honorable strategy that would minimize casualties on both sides while buying time for the main fleet to regroup. Captain Kovac listened to the briefing with a blank expression, then asked one question. How many devourers will this plan kill? Approximately 200 units, replied Commander Jektar proudly. Without significant loss of life to our own forces. 200 out of how many? Intelligence estimates suggest roughly 50,000 devourers in this system, so you're planning to kill less than 1% of the enemy force. Commander Jektar's mandibles clicked with annoyance. It is a measured response. We cannot simply slaughter thinking beings without... They're not thinking, interrupted Lieutenant Colonel Chen. I told you. I've studied their neural patterns. Individual devourers have about as much intelligence as a virus. They only become smart when they're connected to a node creature. And how do you know this? Asked Ambassador Thelnori. Chen's smile was cold. Because I cut open their heads while they were still alive and watched their brain activity. The Concordance officers looked horrified. Dr. Yelana's tank bubbled with distress. You tortured prisoners of war? Prisoners of war are captured soldiers, said Major Williams. These things are parasites. You don't take parasites prisoner. You study them to find better ways to kill them. We will proceed with the planned evacuation, announced Commander Jektar firmly. The human ships will provide escort support. Actually, said Captain Kovac, we have a different plan. Before anyone could protest, the human ships broke formation and accelerated toward the planet at impossible speeds. Their vessels moved like hunting birds, diving through devourer formations with weapons blazing, but they weren't trying to destroy the enemy ships. They were capturing them. Ambassador Thelnori watched in horror as human boarding pods latched onto devourer vessels. Through the tactical displays, she could see human soldiers fighting their way through the crystalline corridors of the enemy ships. Not to destroy them, but to take prisoners. What are they doing? Whispered Dr. Yelana. Learning, said Commander Torres from where she stood beside the tactical display. You can't fight an enemy effectively until you understand how they work. The human boarding teams moved with terrifying efficiency. They used weapons that seemed designed to cause maximum pain rather than quick death. They captured dozens of devourers alive, stuffing them into containment pods that kept them conscious but unable to move. This is barbaric, protested Chancellor Mordun. There are rules of war, conventions that civilized beings follow. Your conventions are why you're losing, replied Major Williams without taking his eyes off the battle display. War isn't a game with rules, it's survival. Within 6 hours, the human ships had captured 17 live devourer specimens and a complete node creature. The Concordance fleet had planned to spend 3 days evacuating civilians and preparing their asteroid trap. The humans had turned the entire system into a laboratory. Lieutenant Colonel Chen set up his research station on the human flagship. Ambassador Thelnori insisted on observing his work. Despite her growing revulsion, she needed to understand what kind of allies they had accepted. The first thing Chen did was separate a devourer from its node connection. The crystalline creature immediately began thrashing in its restraints, its movements becoming random and panicked. See? Chen explained as he prepared his instruments. Without the node, they're just animals. Dangerous animals. But animals nonetheless. You're going to vivisect it, said Ambassador Thelnori. It wasn't a question. I'm going to learn how it works, corrected Chen. Knowledge is the only weapon that matters in this war. The next several hours were the worst of Ambassador Thelnori's long life. She watched Chen cut into the living devourer, while it was fully conscious, studying its neural pathways, mapping its pain responses, testing how it reacted to different stimuli. The creature's screams echoed through the ship, a sound like breaking glass, mixed with dying songs. "This is torture," she whispered. "This is science," Chen replied without stopping his work. "And it's working. Look at this." He pointed to a section of the devourer's brain structure, a cluster of crystalline nodes that pulsed with soft light. "This is how they connect to the hive mind. Each node can control up to 500 drones, but the connection is fragile. Disrupt the right frequency, and the entire cluster becomes helpless." "You learned this by torturing a living being?" "I learned this by doing what needed to be done." Chen's eyes never left his work. "How many billions of your people have died, while you worried about being nice to the things that are eating them?" Ambassador Thelnori had no answer to that. Over the following days, Chen's research yielded results that the Concordance had failed to achieve in months of conventional study. He identified 17 critical weaknesses in devourer biology, mapped their communication frequencies, and discovered that their reproductive cycle could be disrupted with specific electromagnetic pulses. More disturbing was how quickly other Concordance scientists began adopting his methods. Dr. Yelena initially protested Chen's techniques, but when she saw the results, she started asking questions. Then she started taking notes. Within a week, she was performing her own research on captured specimens. "You're changing them," Ambassador Thelnori told Captain Kovac during a private meeting. "Your methods are corrupting our people. Our methods are keeping your people alive," Kovac replied. "But if you want us to leave, just say the word. We can head home and let you handle this problem with nice words and gentle tactics." Ambassador Thelnori looked at the tactical display showing devourer advances across the galaxy. Red zones continued to spread, but they were spreading more slowly now. For the first time since the war began, the enemy was hesitating, pulling back from systems where human ships operated. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you come all this way to help strangers?" Captain Kovac was quiet for a long moment. "Because we're good at this," she said finally. "Because when something needs killing, we're the ones you call. It's what we are. And when this is over, when the devourers are defeated, then you go back to being civilized, and we go back to being the monsters you keep locked away until you need us again." Ambassador Thelnori felt a chill run through her hollow bones. The humans weren't trying to change the Concordance or convert them to some new philosophy. They were simply doing what they did best, like natural forces that couldn't be reasoned with or controlled. But they were winning. For the first time since the war began, the devourers were afraid. And that, Ambassador Thelnori realized, was the most terrifying thought of all. The war changed in ways that made Ambassador Thelnori question everything she had believed about civilization and morality. 6 months after the humans arrived, the devourer advance had not just stopped, it had reversed. The first sign that something fundamental had shifted came from the Rigel system, where Commander Torres had taken a small human strike force to assist a Concordance evacuation. The official report stated that devourer forces had withdrawn due to equipment failures. The truth, which Ambassador Thelnori only learned later, was far more disturbing. Torres had captured a node creature and broadcasted its death screams across all devourer communication frequencies, while slowly feeding it into a matter converter. The psychological warfare was devastatingly effective. The entire devourer swarm in the system had fled, abandoning millions of tons of resources and strategic positions. "It's working too well," Dr. Yelena reported during a strategy session. She had changed over the past months. Her gentle, scholarly manner replaced by something harder and more focused. "The devourers are avoiding systems where human ships operate. They're actually afraid." "Fear is a useful tool," said Lieutenant Colonel Chen. His research had expanded beyond simple biology into psychological warfare and terror tactics. "But we need to be careful not to let them adapt to it." Ambassador Thelnori watched the display showing current battle zones. The red markers indicating devourer presence were shrinking rapidly. But not because the creatures were being destroyed. They were fleeing to regions where human forces hadn't yet arrived. "They're learning to avoid us," observed Major Williams. "That's actually a problem. Fear-based tactics only work if you can maintain the pressure. So we escalate," said Captain Kovac simply. "We show them that running isn't an option." The escalation came in the form of Operation Cleansing, a campaign that made Ambassador Thel Nori understand why Earth had been quarantined in the first place. The humans didn't just hunt devourer ships. They began systematically poisoning the worlds the creatures had already consumed. Chen had discovered that devourer reproduction relied on specific mineral deposits found on dead worlds. Instead of trying to reclaim those worlds, the humans developed biological weapons that would corrupt those minerals, making them toxic to devourer biology. They seeded hundreds of supposedly dead systems with these weapons, turning the enemy's own conquered territory into a poison trap. "You're making those worlds uninhabitable forever," protested Representative Kilneth, after reviewing the operation reports. "Nothing will ever be able to live there again." "Nothing was living there anyway," replied Commander Torres. "The devourers already ate everything. We're just making sure they can't use the corpses." But the biological weapons were only the beginning. The humans began using captured node creatures as bait, implanting them with tracking devices, and releasing them back into devourer space. When the creatures returned to their swarms, human ships would follow and launch coordinated strikes that targeted not just the immediate threat, but the entire extended network of creatures connected to each node. "They're not just winning battles," Chancellor Mordoon observed during a private meeting with Ambassador Thel Nori. "They're committing systematic genocide." "The devourers started the genocide," replied Ambassador Thel Nori, though she felt sick saying it. "They consumed 18 billion souls before we called for help. That doesn't justify becoming monsters ourselves, but it was too late for such concerns." The human methodology was spreading through the Concordance military like an infection. Commanders who had once insisted on honorable warfare were now using terror tactics and biological weapons. Ships that had been designed for exploration and peaceful contact were being retrofitted with torture chambers and research laboratories. Dr. Yilana had become the worst example of this transformation. Her latest research involved breeding genetically modified devourers that would infiltrate enemy swarms and spread engineered diseases through the hive mind network. When Ambassador Thel Nori confronted her about the ethics of such work, the aquatic scientist's response chilled her to the bone. "Ethics are a luxury for species that aren't facing extinction, Doctor," Yilana said from her modified containment tank, which now held several preserved devourer specimens. "I've seen what happens to worlds these creatures visit. I've watched the recordings of children being consumed alive. If becoming a monster is what it takes to stop that, then I'll be the best monster I can be." The final phase of human strategy began when Captain Kovac announced that they had located the devourer homeworld. The discovery had come through a combination of torture-extracted information from captured nodes and long-range reconnaissance by ships that violated every known principle of stellar navigation by flying through active star coronas to avoid detection. "The homeworld is designated Target Alpha," Kovac explained to the assembled Concordance leadership. "It's located in the Andromeda sector, protected by approximately 2 million devourer ships and 700 node creatures. An assault on that position would be suicide," said Commander Jektar. "Even with our combined fleets, we lack the firepower to break through those defenses." "Who said anything about an assault?" asked Major Williams. "We're not going to fight our way through their defenses. We're going to make their defenses irrelevant." Chen stepped forward with a datapad showing biological charts that made no sense to Ambassador Thel Nori's understanding of genetics. "The homeworld is one massive crystal formation," he explained. "The entire planet is essentially a single living organism. Every devourer in the galaxy has a genetic connection to it. We've developed a cascading biological weapon," continued Captain Kovac. "It will turn the planet's crystal matrix into a slow-acting poison. Every devourer connected to the homeworld will begin to die, slowly and painfully. The process will take approximately 6 months. 6 months of agony for an entire species," whispered Ambassador Thel Nori. "6 months of justice for the species they consumed," replied Captain Kovac without emotion. The weapon was deployed 3 weeks later. A single human stealth ship penetrated devourer space and released the biological agent into the homeworld's atmosphere. Then, they waited. The effects were immediate and horrifying. Across the galaxy, devourer forces began exhibiting signs of sickness. Their ships moved erratically. Their attacks became desperate and unfocused, and their reproduction cycles began to fail. But instead of fighting to the end, something unexpected happened. The devourers began to sing. It started as a low-frequency transmission that human communication equipment almost missed. Dr. Ilana was the first to recognize it as a form of music. A death song that spread through the entire hive mind network as billions of creatures faced their approaching extinction. "They know they're dying," she reported to the command staff. "They're saying goodbye to each other." "Good," said Lieutenant Colonel Chen. "Let them sing. It doesn't change anything." But Ambassador Thel Nori listened to the transmissions and heard something that shook her to her core. The devourers weren't just dying, they were mourning. They were afraid. They were experiencing the same terror and despair that they had inflicted on countless other species. "Turn it off," she ordered the communications officer. "Ambassador?" The young seraph looked confused. "Turn off the transmissions. I don't want to hear anymore." As she left the command center, Ambassador Thel Nori realized that the humans had done exactly what they'd promised. They had stopped the devourer threat completely and permanently. They had saved the galaxy, but in doing so, they had shown the Concordants something about themselves that could never be forgotten. They had proven that civilization was nothing more than a thin shell over the same predatory instincts that drove the most successful killers in the universe. The devourers were dying. Soon, they would all be gone, and the galaxy would be safe. Ambassador Thel Nori wondered if that safety was worth the price they had paid for it. The last devourer died on a Tuesday. Ambassador Thel Nori received the report while standing in her private quarters aboard Council Station, watching the stars through the great viewing ports. After 18 months of constant fear, the galaxy was finally silent. No more systems going dark. No more emergency broadcasts from dying worlds. No more desperate evacuation orders. The humans had done what they promised. The threat was over. The celebration lasted for 3 days. Every species in the Concordance sent representatives to Council Station, bearing gifts and songs of gratitude. There were parades on a dozen worlds, monuments planned in honor of their saviors, and formal ceremonies recognizing Earth as the newest member of the galactic community. Captain Kovac attended the first day of celebrations, wearing a dress uniform that somehow made her look even more dangerous than her battle gear. She stood quietly while Chancellor Mordoon gave a speech about courage and sacrifice, while Dr. Ilana presented the humans with the Concordance's highest scientific honors, and while Representative Kilneth offered them ceremonial flowers from the most sacred gardens of his homeworld. When the ceremonies were over, Ambassador Thel Nori found herself alone with the human captain in a small conference room. The silence between them stretched uncomfortable and long. "Congratulations," Ambassador Thel Nori said finally. "You've saved the galaxy." "We've exterminated a pest," Captain Kovac corrected. "There's a difference." Is there?" Ambassador Thel Nori had spent months thinking about that question. The devourers were sentient beings. They had thoughts, feelings, fears. "I heard them singing as they died." Yes, they were sentient. So are the parasites that eat children's brains on Earth. Intelligence doesn't make something harmless. Captain Kovac moved to the viewing port and looked out at the stars. In the distance, Ambassador Thel Nori could see the human fleet maintaining formation around Council Station. Their ships looked like predators even when they were at rest. "We've prepared a formal offer of Concordance membership," Ambassador Thel Nori continued. "Full voting rights, access to our technology, trade agreements. You've earned a place among the civilized species of the galaxy." "That's generous," said Captain Kovac. "But we'll have to decline." Ambassador Thel Nori felt her silver blood grow cold. "Decline? But surely after everything we've been through." "Everything we've been through is exactly why we're declining." Captain Kovac turned from the window, and her ice-blue eyes held no warmth. "You called for saviors. Ambassador, You got exactly what you asked for. But saviors and neighbors are very different things. I don't understand. You understand perfectly. You're just hoping you're wrong. Captain Kovac's smile was sharp and predatory. Tell me, tell me, tell me, what do you think will happen if we join your concordance? What happens when humanity gets bored with peace? Ive. With note. The question hung in the air like a physical threat. Ambassador Thelnori found herself backing away from the human captain without realizing it. We're not civilized beings, Ambassador. We never were. We're persistence hunters from a death world where everything tries to kill everything else. We came here because we enjoy the hunt. We saved you because we enjoy killing things that think they're apex predators. Captain Kovac gestured toward the viewing port, where her fleet waited in the darkness between stars. Do you know what my ships are carrying in their cargo holds? Ambassador Thelnori shook her head. Detailed scans of every world in concordance space, complete records of your defensive capabilities, biological samples from every species we've encountered, genetic maps that would let us engineer diseases specific to each of your people. The words hit Ambassador Thelnori like physical blows. You were gathering intelligence. The entire time, we were doing what humans do. We were learning how to kill you, just in case. Captain Kovac's voice remained conversational, as if she were discussing the weather. It's nothing personal. It's just our nature. But you saved us. You fought alongside us. Dr. Yelena considers Lieutenant Colonel Chen a colleague and friend. Chen considers Dr. Yelena an interesting test subject. He has 17 different plans for dissecting her while she's still alive, just to see how her aquatic nervous system works. Ambassador Thelnori felt sick. You're monsters. We're what evolution produces when a species gets good enough at killing that it runs out of natural predators. Captain Kovac moved closer, and Ambassador Thelnori had to fight the instinct to flee. We didn't come here to save you out of kindness or nobility. We came because we were curious about what the devourers could do. We wanted to hunt something that could fight back. And now that they're gone? Now we know everything we need to know about this galaxy. We know which species are threats and which are prey. We know which worlds have resources worth taking, and which planets would make good hunting grounds. Captain Kovac paused at the door to the conference room. Don't worry, Ambassador. We're going home now. We'll maintain the quarantine and stick to our part of space. But we'll be watching. We'll always be watching. What if we need help again? What if another threat emerges? Then you'll call us again, and we'll come running, because that's what we do. We solve problems that civilized beings can't solve themselves. Captain Kovac's smile was cold as winter. But next time, you'll know exactly what you're inviting into your galaxy. The human fleet departed the next day without ceremony. They left behind medical supplies, technological gifts, and detailed reports on devourer weaknesses that would help the Concordance prevent similar invasions. They also left behind the changed scientists and military officers who had learned human methods during the war. Ambassador Thelnori stood in the same viewing chamber where she had first seen the human ships arrive. As she watched them disappear into the darkness between stars, she thought about the price of their salvation. The galaxy was safe from the devourers, but it was not safe. It could never be safe again, because now they knew what lived in the dark spaces between civilizations. They knew that somewhere among the stars, humanity waited with the patience of apex predators and the knowledge of how to kill anything they encountered. Dr. Yelena found her there an hour later, still staring out at empty space. They're gone, the aquatic scientist said from her floating tank. Are they? Asked Ambassador Thelnori. Or are they just waiting? Dr. Yelena was quiet for a long moment. During the war, she had changed. Her research methods had become ruthless. Her scientific curiosity directed toward finding more efficient ways to cause death. She claimed it had been necessary, but Ambassador Thelnori wondered if the real reason was simpler. She had liked it. Chen left me his research notes, Dr. Yelena said finally. Complete biological profiles of every concordant species. Detailed analysis of our neural systems. Reproductive cycles. Genetic weaknesses. Why would he do that? He said it was a gift. In case we ever needed to defend ourselves, Dr. Yelana's voice was thoughtful. But I think the real reason is that he wanted us to know. He wanted us to understand exactly how easy it would be for them to kill us all. Ambassador Thel Nori closed her eyes and tried not to think about the implications. The humans had saved them, then shown them detailed plans for their own destruction. It was a message clearer than any words. We could have taken everything. We still could. Remember that. What do we do now? Asked Dr. Yelana. Ambassador Thel Nori opened her eyes and looked out at the stars again. Somewhere in that vast darkness, humanity was returning to its quarantined world, carrying with it the knowledge of how to hunt and kill every civilized species in the galaxy. They had proven that predators could masquerade as saviors, that salvation and domination were sometimes the same thing. We remember, she said finally. We remember what we invited into our galaxy. We remember what the real apex predators look like. And we pray to whatever gods we believe in, that we never need to call them again. The galaxy was safe. The galaxy was civilized. The galaxy was peaceful. But in the deep dark between the stars, something else waited. Something that had tasted the hunt among civilized beings and found it good. Something that now knew exactly where all the prey lived and exactly how to find them when the time was right. The Concordance had called for saviors and received exactly what they deserved. The most successful predators evolution had ever produced. Now, with a complete understanding of their new hunting grounds, the war was over. The real danger was just beginning.